Thank you, George. It's my pleasure today to introduce Jana Wendt, someone who needs very little introduction. Many of us know Jana as one of Australian journalism's most important and enduring figures. For those of us who lived through the 1980s and 1990s, Jana was part of our lives, the most recognisable face on Australian television. In recent years, she's turned away from television to concentrate on writing. "I'm a very happy writer," she says. In 2017, Jana wrote an extended, searching article about Erwin Fabian for SBS. The article, entitled Erwin's Century, is an illuminating and moving exploration of the life and work of Erwin Fabian. We were delighted when Jana agreed to continue this exploration by speaking at the opening of this exhibition. Please welcome our special guest.
James, thank you very much. It's a very kind introduction. Thank you to all of you for inviting me to this wonderful new space. It's wonderful to see a community investing so much in preserving the memory of this area and the memory of very important aspects of our history that took place here. Bear with me for the next few minutes because, as Seamus mentioned, I did meet Erwin Fabian, the artist whose works you see displayed around you, and I was very, very moved by his work. It's a very long life, Erwin's life. It continues. I think it's 103 now. It's a life well lived, and it's a highly productive life. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just sketch a little bit about that extraordinary life. It's a pleasure to be here, as I said, because at a time when there seems to be so much discord and disagreement surrounding just about everything in the world, it's comforting to think, at least in my mind, that there is a principle that most people can agree on, whatever their politics or their ideological disposition. I think most of us can say that we believe in the principle of universal human dignity. By that I mean that we recognise every person as valuable and as bringing to the world an individual grace along with their individual humanity. It's a principle that's recognised by people of faith, many faiths, as well as people who claim no faith at all. And I think it's largely because we hold to this belief that seeing other human beings in distress disturbs us. When a person is in misery, in trouble, we feel for them. Because of our common humanity, there's a way that we share in their misfortune. Whether their misfortune is, whether it's the misfortune of strangers whose stories we might see reported on the news, or our friends or families, we instinctively put ourselves in their place. We ask questions of ourselves. What would I do in the same circumstances? Would I survive? Could I survive if what was happening to those people was happening directly to me? Well, the exhibition being opened here today in Tatura, I think it deepens our understanding of human dignity. It casts a light on a particular circumstance, on a particular human being, on the artist Erwin Fabian, who was born into a family of artists as a Jew in Berlin in 1915. The offences committed against human dignity in the years leading up to and during the Second World War trammelled the early life of Erwin Fabian. Erwin found himself in London in 1938, having escaped what he was warned would become the terror of the Third Reich. As a young man in his early 20s, he was attempting to continue his art studies and to scrape together a living. But in 1939, he was designated an enemy alien by a British government in desperate fear of German invasion. He was taken onto the troop transport ship, the Danira, on which he and around 2,500 other men were to travel to an unknown destination. Along with his fellow travellers, he spent most of the journey below deck in semi-darkness, in what one of the men described as the large, dim womb that was to bear us into a new world. At the end of a 57-day journey, Erwin Fabian arrived in Australia, a place he didn't know, and certainly a place he did not choose. So in London, Erwin Fabian had been an escapee, a refugee from Hitler's Germany, who turned then into an enemy alien. When he arrived here in Australia, Erwin became something else again, neither a refugee nor a prisoner of war. He was now officially a civilian internee. So now I referred to having met Erwin a couple of years back, and I noted there that he preferred to talk about the albatrosses and the whales that he saw during the course of that journey on the Dunera's long voyage, rather than about the appalling conditions and the cruel treatment by the ship's guards. And I guess that's one of those points where perhaps the rest of us start asking ourselves those questions that I mentioned earlier. How would I survive? What would I do? Could I survive under those circumstances? Erwin concedes, in his words, awful things did happen, but he sees them almost as an inevitable consequence of, as he puts it, letting loose the dogs of war. He remembers the train journey after his arrival in Australia on the way to the Hay internment camp in New South Wales. He remembers the view out of the window, which he describes as an endless landscape of ochre yellow soil, flat and empty. Now, for a Berliner, that sight, as well as the bounding kangaroos alongside the tracks, must have amplified 100-fold the sense of how far he'd been taken from his roots, from the familiar landscape of his own country and his own culture. But of course, whatever title he was given officially, there was one inalienable part of Erwin's identity, that of artist. During his time in Hay, subsequently in Orange, and finally in Tatura, the artist continued to develop what was his particular creative talent. It was his particular talent, but also it was, of course, a legacy of his family and his cultural heritage. He used his talents to create images of his new life on the other side of the world in Australian internment. It was a life, frankly, he wasn't meant to live, but it was one that was forced on him by the perversely unjust circumstances of a conflict that turned the world upside down. At the war's end, having ultimately served in an unarmed Labour company of the Australian Army, and having been transferred to the Army Education Service, where he was tasked with illustrating Army publications, he went on to make a fine career as an artist. Since 1965, his work has been shown in more than 60 exhibitions in Australia, in Germany, in Britain. In the early 1960s, this was a landmark for his work as an Australian citizen coming back from a period in Britain. His artistic expression came to focus on sculpting and the works in that assemblage style to which he's devoted much of his energies for many years, and of course there's one example of it in the middle of this wonderful new room today. When I met Erwin a couple of years ago in his North Melbourne studio, it was clear to me that this was still an artist fully engaged in his work. He was then in his 102nd year, no slouch. He showed me sculptures that he created from bits of timber, very beautiful bits of timber, I have to say, left over from garden edging. His artistic imagination was clearly undimmed. It was still racing. His mind was still racing, judging by the captivating results that he showed me of the work. He told me on that visit that his memory of the past had not diminished. And I presume that it's because he remembers so clearly the anguish of earlier times that Erwin's inspiration more recently has come from today's images of today's refugees. Their situation, I understand, moved Erwin to begin working again on paper. And once again, some of the results of that work are featured in this exhibition. So I think whatever our views in the political to and fro on the refugee debate, we can't escape that underlying fundamental truth of our shared humanity. In some way, no doubt limited, we who are privileged comprehend the anxiety, the unease and the pain of being far from home, however inhospitable or threatening life in that home may have become for the person seeking refuge. Erwin Fabian's images are very stark. I think they give an indication of the depth of his empathy with those who find themselves in a kind of limbo. To be an alien or a refugee requires much of that person. It requires adaptability, it requires courage, it requires resilience and patience, all qualities I think demonstrated by Erwin Fabian, who used the experience of a cruelly disrupted life as inspiration for his memorable art. So I am, as I said, so very pleased to have been asked to open this exhibition. I'm so very pleased to see them find this place in such a lovely new part, this exhibition gallery. I'd like to thank Seamus one more time for inviting me. He and his colleagues, I'll put in a shameless further plug for Seamus's book, The De Niro Lives. It's a visual history of the De Niro boys, and I understand the second volume of that history is not far off publication. I very much look forward to reading it. The first volume is captivating. So I think all that remains for me is to declare Migration and the Refugee, the Art of Erwin Fabian, this inaugural exhibition in this wonderful new space, open.
Thanks so much, Jana. Could Mrs. Carey, Judy Force to come forward, please? Who's going to make a presentation? Sorry, I'm going to face.